All right, let's get started. So, hi everyone, my name is Sam. I'm going to talk about your one-stop data shop, an intro to foreign data wrappers in Postgres. A couple words about myself. I'm Sam. I studied semantic web, knowledge representation, automated reasoning, so I come from like a theoretical computer science background. I've just spent 5.5 years at Flatiron Health in New York working with oncology data that we integrated from electronic medical record systems. It's less big data and more artisanal, handcrafted data. Everyone always talks about big data. I'm like, no, it's actually kind of very compact. It's just really, really complex and needs a lot of attention. The reason why I'm here talking about Postgres topics is because we used Postgres almost from day one. We also used a lot of SQL Server because all the data that we dealt with was healthcare data. Back in the days, we couldn't run Postgres in Azure. Azure was the only cloud provider that was HIPAA compliant. So we're kind of on SQL Server in Azure, and then at some point, AWS became HIPAA compliant, or at least some of the services, so we moved everything over to AWS, and also with that did a migration to Postgres. That was I call it the summer of pain. Doing like a large-scale data migration is always exciting and interesting. So I've got experience with those topics. I've worked a little bit with, or a lot actually, with in-house ETL tooling that we wrote internally. And I also work with lots of Python, Pandas. So I'm like very, very much on the user side and on the sort of using Postgres to store data, but also because I was a very early employee at Flatiron, lots of like data architecting, building up data pipelines and everything. So I'm going to talk about my view on Postgres and foreign data wrappers and Postgres from very much from a user perspective. Although I actually wrote a foreign data wrapper at some point at my job, and I even forgot that happened until someone asked me about it. My Twitter handle is spbale. I'm mostly tweeting about data tech, ranting about New York and the MTA a lot, and there's also some cute bunny pictures thrown in because I foster 2 rabbits. So if you'd like to follow me, smash that follow button. I'm a millennial, what can I say? Cool, so if you're wondering whether this talk is for you, I've presented you with a very handy decision chart. So what's your experience with foreign data wrappers? If you're pretty new to the topic, that's awesome. You'll learn something new. So please do stick around. If you've already used them, you probably have opinions on them. You might love them, you might hate them. Either way, stick around to share your thoughts at the end. Like I said, I'm kind of talking about this from a user experience. I have certain opinions and certain experience with that. But I would actually love to hear from other people about sort of their pros and cons on that. So I'm leaving about 10 minutes at the end to just open the floor for discussion and hopefully figure out the mic situation for that. Cool. So outline what I'm going to talk about today is why and what. Foreign data wrappers in a while, so I'm going to show a few examples of foreign data wrappers. I am going to walk through build your own foreign data wrapper in 5 minutes or less. And then I'm going to do a wrap up. Get it? Cool. OK, so first of all, why and what? That was a very delayed chuckle. That took like 20 seconds. So first of all, why and what? Your one-stop data shop. So the problem. This is my wonderful visualization of a database that has schemas, so those little folders are my schemas, and the little bullet lists or tables for whatever reason. So you have your data in a database that I call DB1, and the way you usually get any information out of that database is you write queries against it. So you can use pSQL, or you can have an application running on it, you can have data pipelines running it, anything that just pulls data from that one database, maybe joins across schemas, across tables, and gives you insights, it powers your applications. This is sort of a very straightforward pipeline, right? So now what happens if you have your data stored in 2 databases? This could have several reasons. One reason could be you're kind of doing what I used to do, which is integrate data from multiple sources, right? You have, for example, let's say a database with all your sales data, and then you have a database somewhere else that's managed by completely different teams with, let's say, click rates in your newsletters, from your newsletters, right? So you have like data in different databases and different sources, and how do you like combine the data from those different sources if you want to do any kind of analyses on that. Well, technically, you could just write SQL queries and join across the databases again. However, unfortunately, that does not work out of the box in Postgres. So Postgres does not allow you to just join across databases, whether they're on the same database host. So even if you have two databases running on localhost or any kind of server, or whether they're located on different servers, you can't just join across them. As far as I know, SQL Server, so Microsoft SQL Server does support cross-database and even cross-server querying out of the box, which is pretty cool. Obviously, you have to think about things like authentication. So your user that you're using, that you're running the query from on that database also has to be able to actually access the other database, so things like that. But in SQL Server, for example, and from what I understand, nope, just SQL Server, you can very easily just prefix your table name with the schema, the database, and the server, which is pretty cool. From what I know, so that I know SQL Server I've worked with, MySQL and Oracle, this is just what I found on the internet. MySQL has a feature called Federated Storage Engine, and Oracle uses a feature called Database Link that allows you to make links to external databases and then query the data from that one database that you're working from your DB1. So what do? A lot of times, one option for that is to build an ETL pipeline. So you use any kind of ETL tool, like Talent, for example, or the in-house tool called Blocks that we've used, for example, that builds up a dependency graph and has an extract stage where you pull all the data that you have from all the different databases, store it in one place. Then you'd have the transform stage, so you do transformations, you do aggregations, you do joining, filtering, so lots of transformation. And then you have your load stage, which is basically where you put it in sort of the final, I keep saying the final resting place for your data. It's not that. The final, and then my next thought is final destination, which is also not. So the final place where your application or your users use that data. So that's a standard ETL, extract, transform, load pipeline, and you need additional tooling for that. So that's sort of one way to go. The alternative is Postgres extensions, and one of the sponsor keynotes already mentioned the power of Postgres extensions today. So I'm actually very, very excited to kind of follow up on that. There are multiple Postgres extensions that actually allow you to accomplish what we're trying to do, which is query across databases. Pre-PostgreSQL 9.1. And again, this is what I grasped from the documentation. I am by no means involved in the creation of any of these, so if any of those numbers are off, please do let me know. So pre-PostgreSQL 9.1, there still is an extension called DB Link that allows you to create a DB link, a link to an external database, and then run queries across that database. And then with 9.1 and beyond, a concept called foreign data wrappers was introduced, which kind of does the same thing as DB Link. The main difference is, according to the documentation, the syntax for foreign data wrappers is a little more standardized with sort of standard SQL. A and B, there are some performance optimizations, specifically around how much data to pull and when to evaluate where clauses. And then with 9.3, we can not just query the data and run selects, but also actually modify the data with insert, updates, deletes, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to actually show a comparison of DB Link and foreign data wrappers just to give you an idea, and then dive a little bit deeper into foreign data wrappers. So first of all, I have sample data. There's this cool website called mockaroo.com where you can just mock up your own data. So I went with a zoo theme. So imagine you have your database one, DB1, which has data about animals in your zoo. So you have Tad the Turaco and Susanna the vervet monkey. And then you have a DB2, a second database, which has an animal lookup that has a crosswalk from a common name to the scientific name of the animal. And despite the different names, common name and type, just believe me, type is the same as common name. So what we want to do is for every single type of animal, we actually want to get their scientific name. So we want to join from DB1 to the table in DB2. And again, that is unfortunately not possible out of the box. So let's assume we want Jeanette, the carpet python's scientific name from DB2. How do we do that? And this is pretty straightforward. This is kind of why I mentioned like there's a lot of small text, because I'm going to mostly be showing screenshots of SQL queries and kind of walk you through that. So first of all, like I said, DB-Link and foreign data wrappers are extensions, Postgres extensions. So you start with create extension DB-Link. Fairly straightforward. And there's multiple different ways to do this. So I picked one specific syntax for this. There's actually different ways to set up your DB-Link and then query it. I'm kind of doing everything in line. So I'm just selecting from DB-Link. So the function is called DB-Link. I'm specifying the database name as an argument. And then I'm specifying my query that I want to run against that external table as a second argument. And then I have to give the data that I get back, I have to give them aliases. So we know the name of the columns and we know the data types. And then I run the query and I get my results. So this is pretty cool. In this particular case, as you can see, I'm only specifying the DB name. Both DB1 and DB2 run on the same host. I'm just running them on localhost in that particular example. So this is pretty neat, right? It's like you add like the tiny bit more sort of syntax around it. It's kind of like running a subquery here, like your from clause, just query sort of a subtable, a subquery, and you get your results. So this is awesome. Cool. Example 2. Oh, this is really sort of a boring version of that. Just to show you that in addition to querying that table directly, you can also join across the tables. So in this case, again, I have a subquery. The select from DB-Link is now a subquery, and I'm just joining on that from my zoo table onto the subquery that has the animal lookup, and joining on type equals common name. So it's pretty straightforward. And do I have Jeanette the carpet python? Unfortunately, I don't have Jeanette the carpet python in there, but we can look up the scientific name for Jeanette later. So this is pretty clear so far, right? This is pretty straightforward. Oh, we have a question.
Do you need to put the data type text if you don't put the data type like common name and scientific name? If you don't put it, the join will still work?
That's a great question. You know, I haven't actually tried that out. Fantastic questions. I will try that out and will let you know, because I haven't actually tried it, because the documentation says you have to do it. So I'm not sure if it just throws an error if you don't specify it, or if you what you actually get back. You do have to specify the column names at least. Yeah. Great question. It might try and cast it and then just, I'd be happy to just try this out later and actually look into it, unless someone knows. Yeah, fantastic, thank you. So it doesn't, the query just fails if you don't specify you get an error. Got it. Okay, so you can't even do it.
I think if there's automatic passing between the type coming back from the select and the type that you specified in the result on the other server, I think it will automatically pass.
There's an implicit coercion.
If it's text to text anyway, you don't have to specify.
Yeah, I mean, if it's like varchar on the other side,
Yep.
and
Got
you're
it.
basically saying it's text, that should work.
Cool. Okay, that's good to know. We have another comment.
Yeah, the question I have is about the local planner.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know, I haven't used this a whole lot, but
Yep.
I've heard that the planner of statistics locally, planner locally knows nothing about the stats on the
Yep.
external database. And so if you're doing something like this, is it true that the DB-Link query would have to materialize all of the data locally and then it does the join?
Yeah, so from what I understand, that's the main difference between DB-Link and foreign data wrapper, is that DB-Link knows nothing and just pulls all the data and then does whatever operation you have. I only read about it for where clauses specifically. I assume it would be the same for joins, yes. Okay. Take this with a grain of salt. I'm sort of quoting the documentation from memory. Obviously, I'm not, I don't necessarily know all the fundamentals of that. But that's, from what I understand, the main difference between the two types. Cool, let's move on to foreign data wrappers, because that's what I'm actually talking about. So that was DB-Link, pretty neat, right? It works really well. And this is an example for the foreign data wrapper sort of path. So you start with, again, create extension. In this case, the extension is called Postgres FDW. Postgres ships out of the box with exactly 2 foreign data wrappers. One is the Postgres FDW, which allows you to query external, like other Postgres databases, and file FDW, which allows you to query files in a file system. So that's file FDW. So this is, again, create extension, pretty much the same. Step 2 is sort of a little bit like what we did in DB-Link. And like I said, there's actually different syntax in DB-Link where you do something very similar, where you basically establish here is a foreign server. So you start with create server, you give it some name that you want, and then use the keyword foreign data wrapper, Postgres foreign data wrapper. So you say, I want to establish a server using a foreign data wrapper. And then pretty much all the interesting stuff happens in options. So again, all the arguments that you need, like your host, your database name. In this case, I've actually given it the local host. I'm pretty sure it just defaults to that. And your database name are just passed in as arguments in that options clause. So you've created your server, which is you've told Postgres there is a connection to this other server. Then the one step that's also very interesting compared to DB-Link is you create a user mapping. In this particular case, I am creating a user mapping for user Sam, so that's my local user, to the user Sam on the other database. In this case, I have the same user because I set it up with my user on my own server that's running. This doesn't necessarily have to be the same user, so you could just map it to any other user. Obviously, this is kind of where some people who think a lot about security might start cringing, like, oh my God, like which user do I map it to? Does that user have the right permissions, enough permissions, too many permissions, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where it gets a little, where you have to put some thought into it, obviously. And then the last step, and this is kind of what I don't necessarily like that much about, well, I kind of like it, but I don't like it about foreign data wrappers compared to DB-Link. In DB-Link, I'm just sort of like running the query, and I do specify the schema, the data model of the table that I get back. But I kind of, this just seems like it's a lot more stuff to do. What's really cool about it is, so I create the foreign table, I specify what server to get it from, and in the options clause, I do say what table from the other server to pull it from. So in this case, this is also called animal lookup, and I'm calling it animal lookup. I could give it any name that I want. The cool thing here is this persists throughout sessions. So once I've set up my foreign table, once I've created my server, my user mapping, my foreign table, I can shut down my server, reboot it, do whatever I want, and the next time I start it up and I log in, I can run a query against animal lookup, which is pretty neat. From what I understand, for DB-Link, it doesn't persist across sessions. So that's, I think, one of the main kind of benefits of that.
Do you know if it tries to do that on startup or only when you try to query it? In other words, if that link is broken, if that other server does not exist, is it going to fail on startup? Or is it going to fail?
First session, first session connected.
So it only tries to check when a session is connected.
I'm not actually sure, because I have set up like broken foreign tables, and well, if you set this up and the server, for example, for whatever reason isn't set up correctly, it breaks. I'm not sure what happens at startup if that is not available. I'm actually pretty sure it's fine, but as soon as you try to query it, it will actually try and execute something. I don't think this does anything. Once the foreign table is set up, it does anything on startup. Yeah.
So this foreign table, it will not pull the data into your DB.
No. Great question. It's literally just a tunnel, basically. It's just like you're specifying the schema or the data model. Keep using schema interchangeably. You specify the data model of that table, and you basically say, I can you establish that link, but it doesn't do anything until you query it. That's a very interesting thing. I'm actually going to talk about that in the sort of considerations, especially when you think about like performance and things like that, right? Cool. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward. And then what I can do, this is kind of cool, I run the exact same join query that I did earlier, and I can literally just join on animal lookup and pretend it's a local table. So I don't know that it's a foreign table. And again, like I said, I'm looking at this really from a user perspective, from an analyst perspective, from someone who just wants to query the data. I don't care where the data lives or what's sort of behind the scenes. I love the idea of having a one-stop shop, so I don't have to like log into multiple databases. This is actually something that was a real, I think we can call it a problem. At my organization, we had data in lots of different sources. So we had multiple Postgres databases. We started moving some to RDS, where the authentication was different. Some of the Postgres databases were authenticated against using Kerberos. Then we had SQL Server instances where people had different usernames and logins. So people had to kind of get access to all the different data sources, which was really a pain. Also because these were all managed by different teams. So having kind of a one-stop shop from a user perspective, obviously whoever administers this has to think about all the authentication aspects, but for the actual user who interfaces with that database, they kind of just see a unified sort of interface, which is pretty cool. Awesome. Foreign data wrappers under the hood, I'm probably kind of preaching to the choir because a lot of you will probably actually have contributed something to Postgres already. From my perspective, I thought this was pretty cool. It's a bunch of C code that is a Postgres extension that basically just tells Postgres how to execute those queries against external sources. Cool. All right. So some examples of foreign data wrappers in action. This is where I think if you're not super familiar with foreign data wrappers, you can actually see how powerful they are. And this is where I think it gets pretty cool. So example one, two databases on the same host. So I have host A, and I have multiple Postgres databases on the same host. Already showed you that. Like, cool, not that exciting. Example two, you have two databases on different hosts. That could happen, again, because you have different teams, for example, managing entirely different data pipelines, or because you're trying to pull in data from an external data source, for example, that happens to also be a Postgres database. So I do have an example here, which is pretty cool. So there's EBI, the European Center for Bioinformatics, and they happen to have a public gene database, which is a Postgres database. So they give me the host name, the database name, the user, and the password. Great. Like I think it's very important to have a password that's public like that. It's like, you could just not do this. Anyway, but they give you the connection details, which is great. So I could technically just connect to using pSQL, or I could build a data pipeline that pulls all the data, or I could implement a foreign data wrapper for this. So this is pretty straightforward. Again, it's pretty much exactly the same thing. You create the server, give it some name. You say it's the Postgres foreign data wrapper. You specify the host name, the database name, and the port. Then I think the interesting thing here is I create a user mapping for my user Sam, which is my local user, and I map it to that user reader on the other database. So this is really just to show you an example of how you can map users to different users. I have absolutely no idea what that user reader, well, it says reader, so presumably it's read-only, but who knows? So that reader could have a lot more permissions than it should be. And then I create the foreign table again, that white space in the wrong place, and I can start querying it any way I want. Yeah.
Why did you mention that twice? Create server, create user,
That's oh, this is just the echo. So this is just the output, and this is just literally all the output you get from pSQL. It just repeats it. I can also totally remove that. And this line should be the create user mapping. It's just the confirmation output. Yeah.
One thing to mention. So the create user mapping. If you wanted to have that foreign table available for all users, you can also create the user mapping for public on whatever server you're on. Whatever user you need to connect to the remote database, that'll let anyone on your aggregated foreign data wrapper server.
Got it. So just to repeat your comment, so you're saying that in order to make this table available for all users, you can create a user mapping to
Public role.
to the public role. Okay, got it. Okay, yes. So there's a lot of different sort of nuances to user mappings. Also, just to like, I'm only creating a foreign table. One thing you can do is import a foreign schema and then actually give people permissions on all the tables in the schema. So there's a lot of nuances to that. I'm just showing sort of the 101 like basic version of that. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. All right. So that was cool. Postgres on a different server. Now, this is where it gets really cool because we can also make Postgres actually interface with other DBMS. So again, coming from my world where I pull data from all over the place, different electronic medical record systems that store their data in whatever database they decided to use like 15 years ago. We were in a situation where we had to pull data from an Oracle database, I think. And again, we were kind of figured, well, we can build an ETL pipeline, or we can explore this funny, cute little concept called foreign data wrappers in Postgres. So Postgres actually allows you to pull data to set up foreign data wrappers for pretty much any relational or non-relational or any sort of DBMS that you want to pull data from on the same or on a different host. And that's where it gets really cool. Again, EBI, funny enough, also has another public endpoint that's a MySQL database. I feel like they should make up their mind. So how do we connect from Postgres to a MySQL database? Well, I could install like a MySQL command line on my machine and then start querying MySQL from there, or have a general database query tool, or I could build an ETL pipeline again, or I could just plug a foreign data wrapper into Postgres and then query my MySQL database from there directly. So the way you do this is the FDW wiki. So the PostgreSQL FDW wiki is a very, very long scrollable list of all the foreign data wrappers that you've ever dreamed of. And the top section kind of starts with generic SQL database wrappers. So you also have JDBC, for example, which might come in handy. And you also have the specific SQL database wrapper. So I'm actually going to show you specifically how the MySQL database wrapper works. And honestly, this is pretty cool, but it's also very anticlimactic because it looks exactly the same as with anything else we've done. Installation, usually this follows kind of the same process where you pretty much just download, like you check out the Git repo, for example, then you spend several hours trying to get your Mac to actually compile things, download Xcode multiple times, installs, you try and download it again, you find some DMG that you can install somewhere. So that happened. But once you get to a point where your C compiler actually works, you just run make, and then you run make install, and then Postgres should know about your foreign data wrapper that you've just installed. Cool. So like I said, pretty anticlimax. Create extension, MySQL FDW, and if you've installed it correctly, it will find it. You create server. Now this time you tell it to use a MySQL foreign data wrapper instead of the Postgres foreign data wrapper. Create a user mapping. Again, in this case, the username is anonymous and there's no password. And then you create your foreign table. This might just be me sort of being confused, or it's actually a fact, but it seems that the MySQL foreign data wrapper actually implements the options differently between the create server and the create foreign table. So in this particular case, I couldn't specify the database name in the create server statement, but I had to do it in the foreign table statement. That's just, so what that means to me is there might be some differences in how the different foreign data wrappers implement options, and you might just have to figure out where to put your argument, but it doesn't really change the concept. Cool. And then I can very easily start from NCBI taxonomy, so from my NCBI taxonomy, and I get all the data, which is really, really cool. This actually takes quite some time to execute. I'm not sure I think the server itself is really slow, because even if I just connect via MySQL, it takes some time. So I think this thing is just a little on the slow side. Great. And now, PD to anything. So this is where it gets really, really cool. So we've talked about Postgres, relational databases, right? This is sort of like, yeah, okay, this is cool. This is where I think Postgres gets extremely powerful, and Postgres extensions are just like through the roof. Anything that you can make return, it's not even that can return, that you can make return tabular data in some way that can be represented in Postgres data table, you can plug in as a foreign data wrapper. So that's pretty awesome. What? That was me when I was like, whoa, that's wild. Because to me, like, databases were sort of this like small confined box and the specific things you can do. And for anything else, any other data sources that you have, you need to implement like an ETL pipeline, you need additional tools, you need like an additional server, you need scheduling, yada, yada, yada. And then all of a sudden I just log into, like, I hit P-SQL and I can query all my data. So that was pretty awesome. Cool. So I'm going to show you one example. Again, this is sort of from a user perspective. I used to work with a lot of medical professionals. And I'm not going to make them learn SQL or understand, like, even just creating CSV files in like a text editor is a pain in the ass. And then messing around with Excel files is also not fun. So Google Spreadsheets are actually a really great way for your subject matter experts to maintain data in some way. It's collaborative, you have some form of version control-ish. Obviously this comes with a big caveat, like think through your strategy for that before you just let people maintain Google Spreadsheets. But let's assume we have subject matter experts on zoology who want to maintain this animal lookup table in a Google spreadsheet. So how do you pull that data into your zoo database in order to provide really cool zoo statistics, for example? So again, back to the foreign data wrapper wiki, to infinity and beyond. So if you keep scrolling, there's a lot of scrolling. I was actually going to show you like the scroll. There was a lot on there. So you have a bunch of file wrappers, multiple CSV wrappers, because you can't have too many CSV wrappers. Then you have some XML, you have tar files and zip files, so reading from compressed files, which is pretty awesome. And then if you keep going down, you have specific web wrappers, wow. And then all the way at the bottom, you have Google Spreadsheets. Hey, isn't that cool? Like, there's a foreign data wrapper for Google Spreadsheets. One thing I'd like to point out is the second column here that says type. You can see some that say native. If you get, like, once you get to the specific web wrapper section, a lot of these say MULTICORN, so I'm actually going to talk about MULTICORN in the last part. Cool. So again, once we've downloaded and installed MULTICORN, lots of caveats I'm going to explain in the last section around MULTICORN. You create that extension MULTICORN. You create a server. Again, you just give it any name. You say the foreign data wrapper is MULTICORN, and the option now says G-Spreadsheet FDW. So there is some magic behind the scenes, which I will explain in a few minutes. For now, just accept that this is how you install the Google Spreadsheet foreign data wrapper. And then you literally do exactly the same, create foreign table. In this case, if you look at options, I'm passing in a key, which is the URL key of that spreadsheet that I want to query. And I'm passing in a key file, which is authentication details. So it's it's an API key. There's a lot of uses of the word key. In this particular case, key file is really, it's an API key. And I believe an email address that I had to create in like my Google apps. So there's a little bit of complexity, but there's really good tutorials that just walk you through it. And if you follow them step by step and don't jump ahead, which I did multiple times, you will actually get this to work very easily. Cool. And then you can do the exact same thing. Select star from animal lookup G sheet. And you get your animal lookup table straight from the Google spreadsheet. And I think that's really, really, really awesome. So again, from a user perspective, this is rad. I don't have to mess around with multiple data sources anymore. This is my one-stop shop for all the data that I need. Cool. Foreign data wrapper considerations. So there's been a lot of praise. This is also a terrible slide with a lot of text. I'm just going to sort of touch on this. I'm pretty sure a lot of you have thoughts, hopes, dreams. I have 15 minutes left, perfect. So I'm actually leaving about 10 minutes at the end to just sort of discuss the pros and cons, because I'm actually really curious to hear from people. But very quickly, benefits over ETL ETL pipelines. You don't need additional tooling. You don't need additional machines, additional storage. Lots of asterisks because obviously depending on how you implement this, you might need to do things differently. One thing just to point out is that, for example, we switched to hosted Postgres RDS instances on AWS. RDS does not have any, or does not allow you to install any foreign data wrappers other than the ones that come with Postgres, so Postgres FDW and file FDW. So you can, so if you're on RDS, it's an issue. You might actually have to switch to maybe a self-hosted instance. So, it depends. The cool thing is you have a single interface for users. It's much easier to run ad hoc queries. You don't have to build and deploy production pipelines. Your users, especially during development, QA, spot checks, have direct access to the data, which is extremely powerful. If you have to wait to run a data pipeline, an ETL pipeline, to then look at the data and realize it's wrong and then make some modifications and then run it again, people might take shortcuts and just not do that much testing during development, and that's bad. Ability to distribute data over multiple servers. So this is kind of coming from an architect perspective rather than an user perspective. If you're designing your data storage or your data strategy, you might even think, hey, I don't have to have every single thing on the same instance or in the same database, because I'm limited to just querying stuff from the same database. I can actually distribute it if I want. That goes into partitioning, for example, yada, yada, yada. So there's definitely not something that I'm an expert in, but I think this is a really interesting option to think about. And then one thing someone pointed out, I think Keith potentially, who told me they did a one-step data migration from a legacy Oracle server by just setting up a foreign data wrapper, selecting all the data, pulling it in, and then shutting down the Oracle server. And that's it. So it's pretty cool because you don't need any intermediate storage. You don't have to mess around with I don't know what the PG dump equivalent for Oracle dump is, and an import, export, et cetera, but you can just query it. If it looks weird, you can even do spot checks. You can repeat it, so that's pretty neat. However, one thing that I think might be an issue is version changes, upgrades, et cetera, might be more brittle than with ETL tooling. In my mind, every single building block of an ETL pipeline is sort of its own thing. As long as that service runs and it takes input, it takes data as an input, and it outputs some tabular data, whatever version that thing runs on, it doesn't matter. It doesn't impact the rest of the pipeline necessarily, and you can have your multiple components sort of just function independently. With that, you are tied to, is someone maintaining that MySQL foreign data wrapper? If I upgrade, is it going to break? So things like that, where you kind of have everything in one place, that might be an issue. No control over external data sources. If I run this query against a G spreadsheet and someone deletes it, it's not there anymore. That is a problem with data integration in general. It's not just foreign data wrapper specific, but definitely always something to think about, because you're kind of tunneling to an external data source. You expect it to be there. It might not. Actually, funny enough, I don't know if you noticed, but the first, the EBI server that I connected to, the Postgres one, I didn't have a screenshot of the result because that data just disappeared within the last week. It might just be back again, but last time I logged in, there was a public schema and nothing else, no tables, nothing. So, that can literally happen with any external data sources that you're trying to use. Some security concerns, again, mapping to, making sure your user mappings actually make sense. What's a data backup strategy? Again, not necessarily an ETL concern, because you sort of pull down all your data into your local storage, and presumably you have a backup strategy there. If you're kind of expecting to always just, I call it tunnel, kind of tunnel through the foreign data wrapper to sort of live query your data, that might disappear, and if you haven't backed it up, that's an issue. One thing, one way to get around that, this is one pattern that we've used. I've talked a lot about live querying. You just query and join and everything. There's also an option to use your foreign data wrapper to import all the data. So again, instead of going PG dump and then importing, you can actually just import it straight from the foreign data wrapper. obviously that comes with concerns, not concerns, but like you have to think about storage. Do I want to store all this data? Do I want to filter it? What are sort of the operational aspects there? But that is definitely another pattern you can use instead of just like querying the database directly to run a batch process that imports data through the foreign data wrapper. And that also kind of ties into the last point around performance. Might be worse depending on use case. Again, if you live query everything and you run huge joins, or if you pull a ton of data, that if you do that over the internet, that might just be slower and worse. So importing your data through the foreign data wrapper might be an option. The only problem there, obviously, is that you might have drift between the data that you've imported and the data that's live on the database. But again, that's just a data integration problem itself that makes you wonder why you're even doing this sometimes. But like I said, I would love to hear from people about their experience, like the pros and cons sort of working with foreign data wrappers and any other concerns that I haven't addressed yet. So I have a few minutes in the end. Cool. Build your own foreign data wrapper. So from zero to wrap in actually under 5 minutes. It's 3 minutes and 52 seconds, I think, the video. I spent several hours kicking this MacBook, my personal laptop, into shape for actually development. So it's more like 5 minutes plus 6 hours of sort of banging my head. But you only get the best off. You only get the 5 minutes of actual stuff. Very quick sidebar about MULTICORN. So I said I'll explain it, so I'm going to explain this now. What is MULTICORN? MULTICORN is a foreign data wrapper. You install it just like any other foreign data wrapper. It's a Postgres extension. It's a C library. So this is kind of the same as the MySQL foreign data wrapper, for example. The only difference is that MULTICORN allows you to basically plug Python modules into that foreign data wrapper, which I think is really, really cool, because that means anything that you can do in Python that pulls data from somewhere, you can implement a foreign data wrapper, plug it into MULTICORN, and then it just runs. And that's kind of, I find really, really powerful in terms of accessibility, in terms of like ease of development. Personally, I've just been writing Python for a really long time. I find it very easy to use. It's very great. It's great for beginners. There's a tons of libraries, especially for data processing. So Python is a fantastic choice for that. 2 caveats. MULTICORN does not appear to be under active development. The GitHub is a fairly entertaining conversation. One of the developers, someone said, I think these guys have just abandoned the project. And then one of the developers actually responded saying, well, we haven't abandoned it. We're still using it, but it's really low priority for us to work on it. So sorry. So use with caution, check the GitHub. There's no issues with Postgres 11. I could not get it to work at all, or help get it back in shape. So this is also maybe a small call to arms and call to action for people to look at MULTICORN and see if there's any way we can actually get it to run with Postgres 11, for example. And then second, also, I haven't actually figured out how to point Postgres to use my virtual Python environment. So on my Mac, I'm currently stuck with my system Python, which is 2.7. If anyone has advice for that, I would be more than grateful. I tried a lot of different things, and that didn't work out. Anyway, so how does MULTICORN work? Pretty straightforward. Like I said, you have this option wrapper gspreadsheet fdw.gspreadsheet.fdw. If you work with Python, this seems like kind of the path for a Python module, right? And then, like I said, the options to really depend on the wrapper and what the wrapper expects. Cool. So MULTICORN module under the hood. Ooh, okay. Very quickly, it's like this is just screenshots of the GitHub. It's really, really small. So component 1, you have a setup file. This, for some reason, imports a lot of other stuff. You actually just need the setup method from setup tools that just basically gives you some metadata. And then component number 2 is an init.py file that implements a class called gspreadsheet foreign data wrapper that inherits from MULTICORN's foreign data wrapper. And then you implement the execute function. So the execute function is the function that returns the data from anywhere. So you can import the CSV modules, for example. You can run some pandas. You can query the Twitter API, anything that you want to do. as long as execute returns some rows, you're good. Cool. All right, let's do this. So very quickly, I'm going to show this video of how I built a foreign data wrapper. So I'm starting making a directory. This is also mostly just showing how bad I am at typing. There's a lot of typos. Okay, so I made a directory called samfdw, and in that I made another directory called samfdw. You're going to see what's going on in a minute. Arranging my Sublime. Ooh, I type very fast. So this is the setup method, and like I said, you only need to import setup from setup tools. I'm saving it into the samfdw. I made a Chrome extension called Sanity once that hides all the comments on YouTube. In case you're wondering what's going on in there. Okay, so this was setup.py. The second one is, whoops, okay, that did not work at all. Whoa, okay, let me see if I can fast forward to the spot where I actually wanted to pause it. I have no idea how to pause this right now. Anyway, sorry, this is a little awkward. This is the setup, the init.py, where I'm basically just specifying, like I'm implementing the execute method, and it really just returns the string boring data with a counter. It's pretty boring. It's an extremely boring foreign data wrapper. I figured I'll end this talk on a very boring note. So now I'm running setup.py. So I'm just running install. For some reason, I have to sudo everything. As you can see, it installs it, like using setup tools, just installs the library that I just created into my Python path. Restarting Postgres, I've got it installed via brew. Oh no, 2 minutes. Can I just make this run faster? Cool, so I've restarted this, connecting to pSQL, going through the same spiel, create server. Sorry, I don't have to create extension anymore because I've already created the extension MULTICORN. So once you've installed MULTICORN, all you have to do is create server with the specific wrapper that you want to use, the specific Python library as an option. I'm going to attempt to fast forward this a little bit. You get the idea. I've done this multiple times. I've created my foreign table called boring table. I give it a column 1 and a column 2. I specify that I want to use my MULTICORN SAM foreign data wrapper. And then, finally, I query it. I run a select star for boring table, and I have the single most boring foreign data wrapper that you've seen, which has 2 columns and says boring data and counts from 0 through 9. That's exciting. That's pretty much it. So I have 30 seconds left to wrap up. So basically what we've talked about, an intro to PostgreSQL, Postgres 4W. Oh, this is actually wrong. Cross anything querying, where to find existing foreign data wrappers, so check out the wiki, and then a little bit about MULTICORN, some caveats, and how to build your own foreign data wrapper using MULTICORN. And that's it. Thank you very much. I made it. So I guess we don't have time for questions anymore.
We'll probably do a couple of questions.
Okay, couple of
It's lunch after this, so.
Wow. I have to compete against lunch. Maybe we can do like 2 questions and then everyone is free to go to lunch. No questions. Everyone's like, no lunch. Okay, we have 1 question in the back.
When you use this one, the foreign data wrapper or the DB link,
I have to run. Sorry. Hi.
access the table,
Mm-hmm.
the link of foreign data wrapper, does it make use of all those indexes that comes in
Great
the
question.
table?
Yes. So the question is whether foreign data wrappers understand indexes are set on the foreign table. Again, this is me quoting from the documentation. From what I understand, yes, it does acknowledge the indexes on the foreign tables. Yes.
I'll just make a comment that my limited experience with FDW is that when you create your foreign table locally, you
Got it.
something about the data in your foreign table.
Interesting. Okay, so the comment was that when you create your foreign table, you can also import statistics, so your query planner actually knows something about that foreign table. Yeah, again, performance tuning is very, I haven't looked into that. It's definitely something to consider, especially because you are pulling data from somewhere else, so you always need to consider it. Great comment, yeah. Okay, one more.
Can you also pull the data from stored proc and views from a different server?
From stored procedures and views. This is a great point. I am quoting Jonathan Katz, who, from what I remember, said you cannot do that. So you can't execute stored procedures and functions on the foreign server. And we actually had a conversation about views, and we both were like, "Oh, we should check that out," and we didn't do that. So we both literally said, "Oh, we don't actually know, and we need to look into that." And then I did not look into that. So also great question about sort of what you can do there. It seems.
Execute store procedure on the foreign server, but you can access the tables in the local via stored procedure. So the way you can kind of get around that is to take a copy of some of your things. And that means whatever table that you're accessing on the local, you have to make sure you foreign data around all that. And there is still some performance problems.
You could do it with what you showed the last, though. You can make your own foreign data wrapper that executes a start proc and then returns those results to you, because that's what Python would allow you to do.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to do it that way.
Ooh, I like it. So someone just said you can basically implement that in Python to execute, because obviously you can just use psychopg2 and then just do whatever you want. Whew. Okay, and this is also where it gets into the territory of things that you may or may not want to actually do because you open the floodgates. Okay, one more question all the way in the back. Sorry.
For remote controls, you can use proxy.
Sorry, say it again.
You can use proxy.
PL proxy. Yes, which. Get it. Okay, so there's another there's an extension for that. You don't have to just do things in foreign data wrappers. There's also other extensions for that. I will let you all go to lunch now. Thank you so much for the awesome comments. That was super exciting. And I'm here to chat. Thank you.